Did Phil Spencer kill Xbox? Well, we have an article we're going to be kind of looking at and interacting with the idea that Phil Spencer is no longer the hailed savior of the brand, with some of the recent changes with companies and third-party companies talking about not really wanting to put their games on Xbox. And then we have first-party games from Xbox being put over onto other platforms like PlayStation and Nintendo. What you're ending up with is this general sense that the brand is dissolving. It's actually evolving, but semantics aside, long-standing fans of Xbox really feel like the brand they got behind and the vision of Xbox they got behind is not coming to fruition. Now, it's hard to blame some of them, as the Activision Blizzard deal and the Bethesda acquisition deal was largely couched as, we're going to go get more games to put onto places where Game Pass lives. Like, there were phrases like that used. So I completely understand and sympathize and empathize with people who really got behind this vision of go and buy a bunch of property and bolster the catalog and bolster Game Pass. Now, many of us along the way said this is simply not going to work. When you spend that amount of capital, you're going to want return of investment. They're going to want to start putting these games everywhere. They're not just going to do this to feed Game Pass for forever. And that's all coming to fruition. A lot of the demand and a lot of the need for subscription services is starting to plateau. People just aren't doing it as much as they were, and it's not big enough of a funnel of subscribers to make up for the cost of these very expensive studios and the production costs and the marketing costs of some of these bigger titles. And according to an article from VGC, this is a pretty pointed article from Nathan Brown over at VGC that, listen, your plans didn't pan out, Phil, and you didn't save Xbox, you killed it. Now, my initial reaction to this is that Phil kept Xbox in the fight, okay? If it was up to Microsoft, there'd be no Xbox. That would be a distant memory. It would be like another Dreamcast in the long history of gaming. And he kept them in the fight. And the reason that we're even hearing potential rumors about an Xbox handheld or, them iterating on cloud gaming or just taking more games and publishing them into more places like Xbox and Nintendo and PlayStation and Steam, like all these various places. The only reason that's happening is because I believe Phil Spencer kept them in the fight. Now, his plans didn't pan out, and that's exactly what this article is basically about. So let's take a look at it here and kind of interact with what is being said. So Phil Spencer, long cast as Xbox's savior, may be remembered as the man who killed it. And right here, the byline: now that all his big bets have failed, Spencer is turning to corrective measures. That's kind of a theme throughout this article, that the stuff that he wanted to work and to pan out didn't end up panning out. It's my personal theory that at the height and the rise and the boom of Netflix, Xbox thought, what if we brought that to gaming and went with a more value subscription proposition? We could really have an explosion as well. And it just didn't pan out. It didn't work. So, more from the article. Phil Spencer spoke to the press at GDC last week, offering some context or spin on Microsoft's recent maneuvers while dropping a few non-customary hints about the Xbox division's future plans. And the author here says, I take one issue with this. I'm no longer sure Xbox has much of a future to speak of. Moreover, I think Phil Spencer, for so long cast as Xbox's savior, may ultimately be remembered as the man who killed it. So here they're going to reference when he recently spoke to Polygon. He lamented that the game industry simply isn't growing enough, explaining that all of Microsoft's recent moves, the acquisition of Blizzard concessions, the decision to take Xbox exclusives to PS5 and or the Switch, and the layoffs, have been designed to counter this unavoidable, irrefutable truth. Without new customers, Spencer says, everybody else's customer is your success state. You can't succeed unless you draw in customers from other publishers and other platforms. And because you're not finding new customers with the games that you're building, everybody's kind of fighting over the same size pie. Now, I don't necessarily agree with this idea that you have to have infinite growth. You could hit what is a profitable state and sustain that, and then what you would do within sustaining that customer base is have more games, have more spiffs, microtransactions, things like Game Pass. And if you have that user base that you know is at a certain size every year and maybe drawing in new customers as well, but you're largely then looking for more ways to make money within that customer base. And Xbox didn't do that. Xbox fostered an environment where you sign up for Game Pass, and that's kind of the end of the matter. So you're not squeezing more money out of those people or giving them opportunities to buy more games by procuring good relationships with third-party developers or through timed exclusivity. You're just putting everybody on Game Pass and creating a fostered environment and culture of non-purchase, which is why their sales always lag so far behind everybody else. He says here, when you have an industry that is projected to be smaller next year in terms of players and dollars, and you get a lot of publicly traded companies that are in the industry that they have to show their investors growth, because why else does somebody own shares on someone's stock if it's not going to grow? The side of the business that then gets scrutinized is the cost side, because if you're not growing the revenue side, the cost side becomes challenged. See, and again, this is where you not growing the revenue side is not simply because there's less players and less dollars. It's because, number one, we are coming off of an explosion in 2020 and 2021 that has to be considered here. So the industry is not shrinking. It's just recalibrating to normal pre-pandemic levels. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to completely reinvent the wheel. So projecting this onto the market, this is more unique to Xbox's challenges because they just failed to do well this generation with hardware saturation because they went with the two-tier system, and that two-tier system did not make good on promises. The trickle of first-party games and first-party next-gen games was almost non-existent. It's very, very light, and the big games that we got last year did not score that well with the users, which likely means then they were not very commercially successful elsewhere. Like, if you look at the scores of Forza Motorsport and Starfield and Redfall on Steam, they were not commercial successes on those platforms. They did not do nearly as well as they could have because the quality simply wasn't there. So yeah, the revenue's not coming in. You guys didn't bring the quality, and that's something this article is going to touch on. And he says here, now look, Spencer is right to a degree, and if this were coming from a punter, a rank-and-file developer at a random game studio, or a modestly successful newsletter idiot, it'd be fair comment. But Phil, mate, I'm sorry to have to point this out to you, but you're the head of Xbox. I'm not sure you get to pin all of this on the macroeconomic this and that. You have had, I think it's fair to say, a degree of agency in all of this. Indeed, there are maybe half a dozen people with the power to actually change the shape of the game industry, and for the last 10 years, you have been one of them. I do not see much point in dwelling on how we got here because I think it's quite obvious to what has gone wrong. All of Spencer's big bets, the pivot to subscriptions, the variable hardware SKUs, the spending spree for studio acquisitions, were contingent on Xbox not just being, to borrow Xbox's tagline, the best place to play, but the best place to play the best games. Right? I think that's a key point, is they placed a lot of these bets, and then there just wasn't anything there from Xbox to bolster it. There was that drought in 2020, and then 2023 was not impressive. No matter how much spin people try to put on it, the games that got pushed to market outside of Hi-Fi Rush did not get good consumer reception. If there's one lesson we can take from Spencer's era, it's that you can enact all the disruptive change you like, but you cannot disprove this industry's oldest truth. Great games sell consoles. And this is why the famous Kind of Funny interview where he said they weren't going to out-console Sony with an 11 out of 10 Starfield, to many people that was the writing on the wall, that they were abandoning the idea of having quality games to drive hardware. They were going to go with the software strategy of publishing games to make as much money as they could from the revenue that they had spent in their acquisitions. $100 billion later, Xbox still doesn't have them. If anything, I would argue its first-party output has gotten worse since the shopping spree began, and its struggles are, as such, no surprise at all. Yeah, I agree. The first-party output has been I would say embarrassing given the amount of money spent, and Bethesda certainly didn't help with that, but neither did Forza Motorsport. It says here that Spencer spent part of his Polygon interview musing airily about a dedicated Xbox handheld, which I'm sure seems like a no-brainer in the world where the Steam Deck exists, but I imagine it will be an alarming prospect for a development community that is slowly cottoning on to the fact that making games for Xbox is just too much of a faff given the tepid rewards after. And that he's going to reference here that GameIndustry.biz, Chris Dring, came back and talked about publishers questioning putting their games on Xbox. Well, you know what happened? Everybody attacked Chris Dring and said he was full of crap, and they didn't know what he's talking about. And in the wake of that podcast where he said that, 2 games have had to say our game isn't coming to Xbox day one. We're halting production on that. We'll try to do it later. Proving the man was telling the truth, okay? People don't see the point. Why? Well, they have to ensure parity across the Series X and S. It's more work for the smallest platform out there. So telling a developer you have to do more work, spend more bandwidth, and spend more money to make less money, that just never is going to be a business offer that they're going to enjoy. It's why I said many years ago that this was going to happen. In the earliest stages of my disappointment with Series X and Series S, I was saying people are going to start wanting to skip Series S. And if you don't let them skip the Series S, they're just going to skip Xbox altogether. And now it's all coming to fruition. And a lot of us, Chris String got hate for it. I got hate for it. A lot of people got hate for this simply for stating a basic business analysis. And now here we sit. And the point of the author here is, well, now you want to add a handheld version? Best of luck with that. Now, we have a stream about the Xbox handheld and why they might be considering dual boot devices, so it could be both a Windows device as well as an Xbox console device. But that remains to be seen if that's even a possibility of something that they would do. Now, that all of his big bets have failed, Spencer is turning to corrective measures, short-term fixes that might juice the numbers in the next couple of P&Ls, but seems destined to further weaken the Xbox ecosystem down the line. Bringing the likes of the Epic Game Store or itch.io to Xbox consoles would confuse the value proposition, give us more ways to give money to people that aren't Microsoft, and do nothing to transform Xbox's fortunes. This is a little reductionist. I actually think bringing Epic Game Store, itch.io, or Steam to an Xbox console to make it seem more like a PC that you plug into your television would be a big value add, because you would suddenly have way more games, and that would be the big the contest is we have more games on our platform than PlayStation, right? Because you can get Epic, you can get Steam, you can get itch.io. The other thing to consider is Xbox will be getting a cut of all those game sales. Apple makes more money than all of these companies combined, and they don't really make a whole lot of games. They make most of that from the 30% cut in their store. So this is, again, a great way for Microsoft to make more money in the gaming space. I would love to have my itch library on a console, don't get me wrong, but if Spencer thinks that's going to move the needle in any meaningful way, then I have some magic beans to sell him. And if he thinks that this is a two-way street, the first step on a journey that ends with Game Pass on PS5's Switch and Steam, then he truly has lost the plot. I don't know why people keep saying this. Microsoft has no interest of putting Game Pass on these platforms because they're trying to sell games on these platforms, not sell a subscription service that is quite literally the reason they're in the condition that they're in right now. Putting Game Pass in more places is not a priority for Xbox as far as I can tell. Then we talk here about taking former exclusives to rival platforms, yet another short-term thinking. Sure, it may pump the numbers a bit, but each new port is one less reason for a potential new customer to buy an Xbox and one more reason for Xbox owners to switch sides and abandon the platform for good. Once again, I cannot see a way in which this ends with Xbox as we know it today, at least, getting stronger. Well, again, you're missing the larger picture. This is about generating more revenue. It's not about getting people to come to Xbox. Xbox is shifting into more of a publisher role. So they don't care if you switch sides because you're going to be on a platform where you can buy their games. Buying the hardware right now anyway, they sell the hardware at a loss. It's easier for them to make money off of you when you're buying their content on another platform than buying their hardware, and now they've lost money and have to recoup that lost money on you buying games, which many people aren't buying games because they're just doing Game Pass. So the amount of time it takes for them just to recoup the cost of the hardware when someone buys their hardware and only goes on Game Pass is significantly longer than just not losing money on the consumer and getting them to just buy games. Like, as an example here, they talk about, well, if Sea of Thieves charitably sells 5 million copies at 40 a pop on the PS5, that's 200 million in revenue. Now, the mistake the author makes here is, well, last quarter, 200 million would have increased Microsoft revenue by 0.3%. Well, yeah, anything that Xbox does in gaming, when you add it to the total revenue of Microsoft, is going to look small. Like, this is not, I don't think this is a fair goalpost move here, okay? It's a matter of, that would be $200 million into Rare, okay? Making them more profitable. Like these companies that the Xbox owns are like they're not it's not attached to just one big monolith. Like Rare needs to be generating revenue. This makes them like a valuable piece of property and a valuable development studio to then have if you can take their property elsewhere and have it generate hundreds of millions of dollars potentially. Like, we're not saying that's how much they're going to make, but any game Microsoft sells, any game Xbox sells, if you compare it to the overall Microsoft revenue, it's going to look teeny tiny. That's not the way to look at this, okay? So I think this is a mistake in the article to make that comparison. To be clear, I feel bad for Spencer. He says he seems a decent sort. I think he's coming to this with the best of intentions, and in a parallel universe where every horse he backed romped home, he would be credited with transforming and perhaps even saving the game industry. The gaming industry doesn't need saved right now, so I'm not sure why he's saying that. I think you could say transforming and even saving the Xbox game identity maybe, but the game industry doesn't need saved right now. In another, where instead of spending $70 billion on Activision Blizzard, he spent it on 230 odd games with the same budget as Spider-Man 2, perhaps Xbox is flying. But in our world, he has spent 10 years and gargantuan amounts of money taking Xbox from third place to third place, and that is not the market's fault. If the writing isn't on the wall for Xbox as a whole, then it certainly could be for him. I think they're going to try and make Phil Spencer the scapegoat, which is unfortunate. Because as I said on the outset of this video, he kept Xbox in the fight. It's the only reason we have an Xbox brand today that will keep Microsoft relevant in gaming. So I think Microsoft is probably thankful for Phil Spencer's leadership and what he's managed to do. They're probably thankful they still have an inroad into gaming, especially if some of their bets pay off with some of the mobile or some of this property or cloud gaming or the future of just having an ecosystem or a very, very profitable publisher. Gaming is growing as an industry, and it makes tons of money, especially if you start moving into other avenues. So I do agree that them being in third place is not the market's fault, and the market's not showing some sign of like just dire circumstances of shrinking. It's growing and it's making more money, but they have to start to lean into other avenues. This is why PlayStation's looking into PC. It's why Microsoft wanted to get into mobile and to publish games into more places. So Phil Spencer didn't kill Xbox. He just kept them in the fight, and in order to stay in the fight, they're really evolving and changing what they look like, which to some people is the death of Xbox, and to others, it's just the beginning. So, let me know what you think in the comments below. Hit subscribe, hit the bell button. This usually rolls over into a member segment. Hit join and pick the $6 tier if you want to be a part of my extra content, and I'll see you in the next video.